Thank you for coming out to our semi-annual industry meeting. Sorry about that. I think that's better. Okay. Well, thank you. I hope no one had any trouble with traffic or BART problems. I know that's common. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. We have a pretty packed schedule today. For starting out, we're going to have Erin Ferguson. She's our Acting Asset Management Director, and she's going to give us some general multifamily updates. Next up, we'll have Jim Raymond present on a new notice, the H 2018-01 funding availability for TPV's notice. Next, we'll have Sylvia Cuellar present on a new memo regarding fees for late payment of rent in HUD subsidized properties for the West region. Finally, next up, we'll have Sapna Talati, and she'll be giving us some Connect Home updates. I'm really excited about that one. Next, we have Julie Eklund presenting on 8BB and preservation. Next up, we'll have Anna Bascom. She'll be presenting on REAC postponements, appeals, and failed scores. Then we will have Jameel Hill, who's visiting us from the Los Angeles field office, and he'll be presenting on best practices for 2530s. And finally, we'll have Kahi give us a presentation on special claims and waitlist best practices. Just a quick comment. We will be leaving all questions to the end, and that's if we have time. So what we have set up is we have note cards in the back with pens, and if you have a question throughout, if you could please just write down your question, and then when we get to the end, we'll go through the questions, and we'll also go through industry announcements if we have any. And on those note cards, please write down your email address in case we don't have time. And we will be picking those up towards the end. Okay, thank you. So we're going to go ahead and get started with updates from Erin Ferguson.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Okay. So I'm just going to go over some basic updates for the leadership, the PBCA contracting, and just some other general items. So national leadership update. As everyone knows, Secretary Carson's been in place a little over a year now. We have Pat Patanod is in place for the Deputy Secretary. Janet Goldrick is now the Senior Advisor to the Chief Operations Office. Brian Montgomery has been nominated as the Office of Housing Assistant Secretary, Federal Housing Administration Commissioner. And we're waiting for a full vote in Senate for that. And Dana Wade is now the General Deputy Assistant Secretary. PBCAs. So the solicitation that went out, both the national and regional solicitation, has been, it was released in December 17. It has been canceled effective March 13th based on the number of comments and the types of comments that we received from the industry. So that has been taken completely back, and future requirements will be initiated through a brand new solicitation. So that will be expected to come out in several months. Don't have a time frame on that yet, but that is basically starting back over and reviewing all of the comments that were received before they do the next solicitation. We had a change here in our branch chiefs from the last industry meeting, and Marie Mosby has left our division and gone to the Minnesota office. So this is the new schedule as to your states and who your branch chief is over those states. Ramona's still over Oregon, but now she has taken on part of Northern California. My branch does Idaho and Alaska, and I have a portion of Northern California. Jim Raymond and Sylvia still have the Southern California, Nevada, and Hawaii, but they also do assist with the Northern California portfolio just based on staffing needs. Communication, we bring this up at every industry meeting. Just a reminder that the sf.incoming@hud.gov is the mailbox you want to use for all of your new submissions. We just want to remind you that that's been working really good. It helps our tracking. It helps us meet all of our time frames. But just please remember that once you submit the initial, Any communication you have back and forth with the AE or branch chief after that, just communicate with them. Please don't CC the SF incoming box, because that then generates a new task and we have to determine if it's related to the original submission or not, so then that then slows down some of our time frames. So just a reminder, it's been working well, but we still notice that occasionally. And we had implemented the, for PRAC contract renewals, when you receive the PRAC contract from your funding specialist, you send your signed contract to the sf.funding@hud.gov. That makes sure that it gets executed in a timely manner. If you send it back to the AE, it may go through that SF incoming process, and that could slow it down. This has been working well. And one thing to remember is that we have to verify the DUNS number and the tax ID number. So if you haven't done that with your initial submission, the funding specialist will ask you for that. And so if we haven't gotten that back, that will also slow down your processing of the actual contract itself. So just a reminder on that one. General updates, the Residents' Rights and Responsibilities brochure has been updated effective March of 2018, and there's the link for that, so make sure that you're using the most current one. And the CNAE tool, it is fully functioning now from what I understand. There is a lot of training and resources available. We included the link. We've seen a lot of some new trainings come out, so to refresh you on how to use that. This is also for all PRACs. This is fairly new for the PRAC portfolio. If you're requesting an R4R increase in your budget, you may need to submit the eCNA tool. So check with your account executive before you submit that. It's going to depend on the threshold and other items in your budget, but you may be required to do that, and that could delay some of your processing. So that's a new function is for PRAC renewals. We need to make sure that you have that. Okay. And handbook changes, 4350.1. The changes are continuing. They are rolling them out chapter by chapter. We have now completed 10 chapters that have gone out for posting, and we've received public comments, so those are being reviewed. They are starting on 2 more chapters, the chapter 101 for initial servicing and chapter 4.06 for prepayments of section 202s and other loans. So look for those on the drafting tables when they come out. We definitely want your comments and feedback on those so that they can review that before they publish them. So we have usually 30 days once it posts to the drafting table for your comments. And now I will turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Morning. I just wanted to take a brief couple minutes to make everyone aware of a new notice that came out in February, Notice 2018-1. This is a notice in conjunction with PIH. There's a PIH notice 2018-2. The purpose of the notice is to make $5 million available for tenant protection vouchers or enhanced vouchers for families, low-income households in low vacancy areas, generally that pay more than 30% of their income towards rent in HUD-assisted properties. This is a request that can be sent to your account executive to request the available money, the $5 million on a first-come, first-served basis, based on the requirements in the memo. The requested vouchers can either be enhanced vouchers or project-based vouchers, and there's descriptions between the two in attachment C of the memo. There's actually 4 attachments in the memo: the requirements for determining the at-risk households, the sample format for the identification. One attachment is the description between the project-based vouchers and the enhanced vouchers, and then attachment D is the PIH process. So this is a this is a request that would have to go through PIH as well, but you would work initially with your account executive to determine your eligibility, to see if you can get vouchers for some of the units in your assisted properties, and then we work with PIH. So there are one of two triggering events must occur to be eligible. That's this is just generally speaking. The notice actually goes into this quite a lot, but one of them is the maturation or the end of a HUD loan that required prepayment approval, as well as the expiration of some affordability restrictions that occurred at your property. So those are the two major triggering events that would have to have occurred within 5 years of the notice of the issuance of this memo. So within the last 5.5 years, basically. And these are intended for only low vacancy area properties that are identified in the memo as well. There's a link in the memo to determine whether or not your property is within one of these low vacancy areas. And it's generally public housing with occupancy of more than 90%. There's a list of requirements as well that are spelled out in the memo, but it's tenant notification. The funds are available until they are exhausted, and that's countrywide, so not just with the West region. The household must be paying more than 30%, and PHA then also reviews the request to determine the eligibility. Again, it's just the notice that came out earlier this year. I wanted to make everybody aware that there was some set-aside money that's available for these vouchers for projects that you might already be managing if you're interested. If you have any questions, please include your email on the note card, and we will get back to you with any questions. But if you're interested, please work with your account executive to determine whether or not your projects are eligible. That's it. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to introduce Sylvia Cuellar. She's going to talk about late fees. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. The topic that I have this morning is about late fees. Earlier this year, in the beginning of April, a memo went out to all of you that are in our listserv, that are signed up for our listserv. And this memo came from Thomas Zumbrado, and it's in reference to fees for late payment of rent. Back in the early 2000s, I think it was 2002, there was a memo that came out allowing owners and management agents to charge a flat rate fee, late fee, of $20 a month, regardless of when it was that the tenants paid the rent, as long as the rent was late. So this was in response to the owner's request in Northern California. It only affected properties that were being serviced out of the whole multifamily, San Francisco multifamily hub, and the Sacramento office. So those of you that are not serviced by those two offices probably are a little bit not concerned, but confused about this notice. Anyway, with the new transformation, we're trying to be more consistent, not only within the region, but also throughout the country. So that's the reason for this memo of April 6th. And in this memo, we're basically just rescinding the previous memos that we had issued. And we're going to go ahead and implement this policy beginning June 1st of 2018. So if you are currently charging a flat late fee of $20 for late payments of rent, you're going to have to notify your tenants that the late fee is now going to be in compliance with the HUD Handbook. $5 on the 6th and $1 for each additional day. Okay? And that's all I have. I would like to introduce now Sapna Talati, who will be talking to you about Connect Home updates.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. At the last industry meeting, I introduced the Connect Home program to everyone, and for today's meeting, I'd like to talk about some updates to the program and also offer ways owners and management agents can get more involved. So as a quick refresher, Connect Home is a program that was created in 2015 to bring affordable broadband access to HUD-assisted housing. It is a public-private partnership between HUD, internet service providers, nonprofits, public housing authorities, and city governments, and now multifamily properties. You can think of it as a modern version of the Neighborhood Networks program, And it's already been implemented in the office of PIH, and now we have brought it to multifamily. So you might be wondering, why is Connect Home important? Well, as you can see from this slide, families in the lowest income groups also have the lowest access to broadband at home. And a lot of households that live, a lot of these low-income households are households that multifamily, where people in, where, a lot of these low-income groups also have low access to internet at home, and these are also where they live in multifamily housing. And as you can see from this slide, the top reason why they don't have internet at home is the cost. The cost of the actual internet subscription and the cost of the device. And not having the internet at home is a real obstacle, especially for students. It's estimated that almost 97% of students are required to use the internet in order to complete homework assignments. So students that don't have access to the internet at home face a real academic disadvantage. So the internet is a really extremely important tool, and because many of our residents cannot afford it, Connect Home has brought together internet service providers and nonprofits to offer low-cost devices and services. So these are the flyers that we've been sending out to our targeted properties. And these flyers contain information about the terms of the deal, how to subscribe, and the rates. And I know it's hard to read, but all of the rates are less than $10 a month. And since the program has launched, we've been able to send these flyers to select properties in select cities, and we are now asking all of our owners and agents to help us raise awareness about this program. So with Connect Home, owners are not asked to pay on behalf of the residents, nor are owners allowed to use project expenses to pay for internet for individual households. Connect Home is a program where the resident signs up and then maintains a subscription for their household. And what we're asking our owners and agents to help us with is, if households don't have internet at home because of the high cost, please let them know that these low-cost offers now exist. And you can do that by posting the flyers in common areas, having direct communication with the residents, attaching flyers to units, or sharing information with residents when they come into the office during recertifications. So this is the list of our select cities. It's Fresno, Sacramento, Stockton, Los Angeles, Denver, Seattle, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, and Phoenix. And I've also included this data on this table just to show you how strong our impact could be. So in Fresno, we have over 1,500 children that are living in multifamily assisted properties. And in Los Angeles, we have over 3,800 children living in multifamily assisted properties. And we know for a fact that not all of these households have internet at home. So we're hoping that we're able to bring this information to the residents to let them know that if they don't have internet at home because of a high cost, there are now options. So we're asking you, if you are interested and you have properties in one of the select cities I just mentioned, please email us at connecthome.mfh@hud.gov, and I'll send you an informational packet. If your property is not in one of the select cities, but you're still interested, you can still apply. Just visit everyoneon.org and type in your property zip code, and then click next on the form on the website, and you'll be able to see the options in your area. We also have a flyer in the back that Amanda Kochek made about information for Connect Home, so if you're interested, please pick one up. Also, please feel free to always email us at connecthome.mfh@hud.gov. That concludes my presentation. We hope that you join our mission, and next I'd like to introduce you to Julie Eklund.
Thanks, Sapna. So for those of you who were here at the last industry meeting, I talked a little bit about ABB, and I promised you that I'd have some more information next time, and so here I am with some updates. I'm going to go back a little bit. This did not transfer properly, but that's okay. We don't really, I'll explain it to you. The pictures didn't all come through, but that's the beauty of technology. So I wanted to go back a little bit. Even though we talked about this, it has been a long 6 months for all of us, I think. So I wanted to go back and explain just quickly what ABB is, because, you know, we in HUD love to have our little acronyms. ABB actually comes from the Housing Act of 1930. Oh, this is what they did. Oh, so it's actually fancy. Okay, so the idea is that when we have a project that is, for one reason or another, getting out of the HUD programs, whether completely because they're opting out, or sometimes in part because they may have vacancies and they want to reduce the number of subsidized units that they have, we can actually transfer that budget authority to a new project. And what we have here is to show that it doesn't have to be currently HUD affiliated. It can be a existing building that's not HUD affiliated. It can be an existing building that is HUD affiliated, or I bet we're going to have here, we can even do it with new construction. Obviously, it still has to follow all of the requirements that we have, but we have a great deal of flexibility with this new program. Or actually not entirely new program, I should say. As I mentioned, it's been around since 1937, but it wasn't in use very often up until the last couple of years. HUD has really made an effort to focus on this. We all know that the funding is limited, and so we're trying to recapture every dollar that we can and not let any of this money go to waste. So this is, I'm not going to go through all of this. This just really gives you the background on all of the legal requirements of it. Now, prior to the time that we had this nationwide program, it was really difficult for owners to understand what was required if they wanted to do this. And different HUD offices weren't necessarily handling it the same way. So we've done something nationwide, kind of as Sylvia was talking about, as part of the transformation, to try to get everybody in line doing the same thing. So what we've been doing up until now is, as I mentioned, doing voluntary deals, where an owner who is getting out of the program chooses another owner and makes a recommendation that we transfer the budget authority to that owner. Probably most of you who are here may have heard about this or seen this. We've had not too many deals here in California, but you know, a few, and nationwide, all the more so. But we haven't seen a lot of it. Now this is where I'm getting into the new information that I wanted to talk about. So we recently were given approval to transfer budget authority in cases where we are removing the funding due to an enforcement deal, so a foreclosure or an abatement of some sort. And in those cases, rather than having the owner choose the new, we call it Project B, Owner B, to receive that subsidy, we're going to work with local governments to find appropriate projects to transfer that budget authority to. And this is something that we're really excited about here, because a lot of times in California we're not seeing a ton of opt-outs. And you know, we have a lot of great owners as well. We're not seeing a ton of enforcement, but sometimes those do happen. And again, we want to be able to hold on to that money and have it used to maintain safe and affordable housing. So we're very excited about this. This talks a little bit about the different requirements. Again, HUD isn't going to be involved in choosing this other than facilitating the arrangements with the local government to determine what would be appropriate. But you might wonder, well, how is this government entity going to choose? And we're trying to make it as easy as possible. So for those of you who haven't heard before, we sent out a notice that talked about sending in a letter indicating that you want to be a possible recipient of preservation funding through ABB. And now that information is actually available on this website, it will take you to an Excel spreadsheet that will show you all of the information that we have received. It also has some general information on APB, which is very helpful. And it also gives you the guidelines on how to submit a letter indicating that you want to become a potential recipient of ABB funding. So I would certainly encourage any owners that are not fully funded, if you have units that are not subsidized by the government, or if you are aware of other owners who may not be at this meeting, please let them know that this is a possibility. This gives the information as well. You can find this on the website. Basically, we try to make it as simple as possible. We're not asking to get a lot of information, but we just ask that you provide the address and name of the property, where you would like to receive it. If they're HUD affiliated, provide us with the information so that we can find it in our system, and of course who you want to be contacted, and we can give that information either to owners who are considering opting out or reducing the amount of subsidized unit, or we will give it to the local governments in instances where we have enforcement. So again, this is something that we're pretty excited about, and we're doing our best to hang on to that and transfer that subsidy over to the wonderful owners that are continuing with our program. And I don't know, I might have more information for you next time, but I'm not promising it right now. And now I'm going to bring up Anna Bascom, who is going to talk to you about REAC postponements, appeals, and failed scores.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Anna Bascom. Aside from being a resolution specialist, my other duties as assigned is coordinating all the REACs for our region. So that's all the REAC inspections, postponements, scheduling issues, things like that. The first thing I want to do before we dig in, does anybody have a burning question, but because you didn't have a note card, you couldn't write it down? So does anyone need a note card? Actually, what I'm going to do, I want to just pass it around. Okay, so you might have questions as I present today, because this is information, you can't just Google it online, some of this information, so you want to make sure that you're writing down your burning questions for myself, for any future presenters, and then
Past presenters.
Huh?
Past presenters.
Past presenters, whatever questions you have that are burning that you might have, you want to make sure that you write those down so you get them answered. I am sure that most of you are familiar with what a REAC inspection is. If you aren't, here's some just generic information. I wanted to give this presentation because I wasn't sure if owners and agents were aware of some of the options you have when it comes to REAC. But was that O's? Like, hooray? You might not be aware of some of the options that you have because it's not online. It's not something that is just broadcasted because we want your properties inspected. However, as you know, there are instances, there are times where there are fires, there are vandalisms, there are all of these sorts of good things, natural disasters, especially SoCal up here, we had fires in last year, so here are just some options. And in addition, I want to talk about appeals as well, because you might already know, the higher your score, the less often we visit you, which I'm sure you're like, that's exactly what we want. So if you get 90 and above, it's every 3 years. You might know that already. 80 to 89 is every 2 years, and 79 and under is every year we visit you. So you might be interested in some of this information here. So first, you get a call from an inspector and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. We have rehab going on, we're putting solar panels on, we just had a natural disaster happen, we're not ready. So to cancel or postpone, there has to be a good reason. And what you think is a good reason is not a good reason to headquarters, most likely. And here are some examples. A good reason is you're at the end of a business agreement. Basically, your performance period with HUD for a physical inspection is over, so we shouldn't be inspecting your property. You have major rehabilitation, that's your huge tax credit rehabs, things like that where you have active rehabilitation. The word is active rehabilitation on the site. There's like extreme unexpected damage to a property, and that's like extreme major damage to your property would qualify for a postponement and or cancellation. sorry if you notice, I'm a wanderer. So examples of real life unapproved. So these are actually examples of requests that have come in that headquarters was like, that's not okay. So repairs that are isolated to a location. This, for example, let's say you have Mrs. Smith, she's in unit 401, and for some reason her toilet has clogged, and now it has damaged not just her unit, her neighbor's unit, underneath her unit, everything is damaged in this isolated area. So that to headquarters is not okay. And then we'll talk about what options you have if that does happen to your property. Headquarters still wants your, because most of your property is inspectable, so you want to make sure that we get it inspected. If you have plans for rehabilitation, so just because you have plans for rehabilitation doesn't mean you get a postponement. There has to be, again, active, major rehabilitation in your property. So it doesn't qualify. So if you're like, well, the REAC is going to be on May, and we're closing in June, and we're going to have, we're not going to be ready. Well, headquarters is under the impression that your property is decent, safe, and sanitary at all times. And I know that decent, safe, and sanitary means one thing to you, and one thing to headquarters, and one thing to your REAC inspector. So, but there are options again. Or you're planning to opt out of your Section 8 contract. So for example, you give the 1-year notification to your residents, and but your performance period isn't up, so you still have that 1 year left of your HAP contract. If they ask to postpone, and you're still receiving subsidy, you're still in your performance period, so we're not going to postpone or cancel your REAC inspection. So again, like I said, there are still options, and one option you might not be aware of is something called an offline letter. This letter basically says, Mrs. Smith in unit 401 has damaged X, Y, and Z units, and therefore we would like them to not be inspected. And if you give us information and support, we will be able to provide you this letter that you present to the inspector the day of the inspection, and they don't look at those units. Okay. Another thing that you might have is maybe it's bigger than just a couple units. Maybe it's sort of isolated, but headquarters, you already tried to get a postponement, headquarters was like, no thank you. You can also do a pre-database adjustment. So that means that, what's a good example? Oh, a good example is if you, for example, there's other bullet here is ownership issues. This isn't if your owner is non-compliant. This is if there is, for example, a border on your parcel where the fence is on your neighbor's side, and it appears that it's on your side, and the inspector comes and says, this is overgrown vegetation, 10 points off, and you're like, I can't do anything about that. So if you know that that's a case for your property, then you want to get a pre-database adjustment done prior, and what happens to that is if it's approved, then it gets into the database, and so then next time you're inspected, that information is already in the REAC database, and you won't be docked off for those points anymore. So it's a really good thing, especially if you're taking on new business, you're buying a new property. That's a really good thing to keep in mind. But what if you do? What if you do have active rehabilitation, especially with our portfolio shuffling so much? Your account executive you're assigned now might not be aware that there is active rehabilitation, and then you schedule the REAC inspection, and you're not ready. So in those cases, you'll need to submit a formal request. Oh, rewind a little bit. The first thing you want to do when you get the call from the inspector is tell them, I'm going to have to get back to you. And don't schedule that same day. That's something to share with whoever is responsible for your property's REAC inspection and scheduling that. Because once you schedule it and it's in the books, it's harder to postpone. It's harder to get that off the books because a lot of times HUD is still liable to pay that inspector even if the inspection doesn't happen. So that's why there is a lot of pushback at headquarters because taxpayer money is going out and these inspections aren't happening. So tell them we'll get back to you, and then immediately contact your account executive with the following information: a written request with a start date, estimated completion date, and description of the construction rehab work, your notice to proceed, and that's the letter that you, or the thing that you give to the inspector or your contractor that says, yes, please start work, your schedule of values, and construction contract. Again, postponements are at the mercy of HUD headquarters, so make sure you're telling your story when you're asking for these postponements. But then in some cases, there's just surprises, like uninspected things that happen, and so here are some of your options. You can ask for a postponement. you can ask for a pre-database adjustment, and you can ask for an offline letter from your account executive. Really utilizing that offline letter is actually going to be very beneficial because that's at the discretion of your account executive and their branch chief. So that's kind of like, if we think it's reasonable, it doesn't have to go all the way to headquarters and have a million eyes look at it at that point. So the day of inspection happens, and you notice that your opinion of what is decent, safe, and sanitary is not the same opinion as the inspector, and you disagree, and or there are technical errors that you find when you get the report back. You have two options for appeals. You have a technical review, which is due 30 days from the release date of the report, and you have a database adjustment, which is 45 days from the release of the report. The one thing that I've heard a lot, because I also coordinate the notices of violations and default that go out for under 60 REACs, is I didn't know. So you have maybe your for some reason the person who was supposed to know about the failed score didn't know about the failed score, and I believe you. Maybe I'm gullible, but I believe you. And so you need to talk to the people in your company. Make sure that the coordinators for HUD systems are correct. Make sure that your account executive has the most recent management contact information for you so that we can get you information in a timely manner. A lot of times, especially when there's like change of ownerships, what has happened in our HUD secure systems, if there's a management company, they put their information in for the owner's information. And then what happens is when there's a change of management, that doesn't get updated. So just double check your portfolio, make sure that in HUD secure systems that you have the correct people in there. Because these timeframes are really important. What happens is you send your appeal in to REAC at headquarters, and the most common denial of any items, no matter how good it's supported, is it wasn't submitted timely. So they're not even going to look at it. They just go, oh, what was the date? Oh, nope, no thank you. And they just decline your whole appeal that you worked really hard on. So the difference between a technical review and a database adjustment is your technical review are actual technical errors. So you found that there was a non-existent deficiency, there are unit count errors or building data errors. Again, for database adjustments, these are things that are out of your control type issues. Oh no, I did the thing. Hold on. Okay, so how to submit a technical review. All this information is available, online. If you just Google technical review, REAC HUD, you'll find this information, but just in case. You want to make sure that you're submitting within, again, 30 days for a technical review. You are going to mail a hard copy. I know, who does that anymore? But you're going to mail a hard copy to the REAC Technical Assistance Center directly. Please send a copy to your account executive. That way, if that copy gets lost, if we need to follow up, then at least your account executive has a digital copy and can follow up for you if you don't receive a response. What to submit? So it's very technical and very precise what they're looking for. So I encourage you to go onto the website and see the samples that they have. Sorry, let me check my time here. Okay. So the idea is to submit evidence that is objective and verifiable. That means that, these are examples, there are dated pictures, signed and dated material from an objective source, such as the fire marshal, building code official, or similar evidence. So it has to be, if you're going to get a letter, it has to be from a licensed professional, if it's not from a fire marshal or code building person. For example, if you are in Unit 401 with Mrs. Smith, and she's, like, the inspector says that the door isn't working, and she writes a letter and says, well, I vouch this is my unit, and it was working, that doesn't count as support. It has to come from a verifiable source or a licensed professional. And make sure the pictures that you're sending, I know a lot of people use their phone cameras, but your phone camera doesn't date stamp, right? So if you send a picture to REAC, they don't know if it was taken today, if it was taken yesterday, before the inspection, after the inspection. So make sure you have, if you're going to submit photos, that it's time-stamped with the date that you took that picture. Here are some examples. We're running a little bit out of time, so I just want to cover one of the biggest ones, which is a letter from your account executive is not considered objective for some reason. it's not. So don't ask us to write you a letter saying, Anna, but you knew that there was this and this and that. No, it doesn't count. So please, this is just excerpts from the website. Please take a look at that if you're wanting to appeal scores for technical review. For a database adjustment, the similar criteria, you're still going to mail it. The biggest difference here is you have more time. You have 45 days from the release of the inspection score. And then also here are some more examples. I believe that there was one. Oh, I wanted just to make a note for when if you are saying you want a database for construction on your property, make sure that the support that you send is dated, signed. The key is dated. Everything has to be dated. So if you submit contracts that are not signed and not dated, REAC is just going to kick them back to you. So make sure that they can verify that this is an actual thing that is happening because it'll be signed and dated accordingly. So no one likes to talk about failed REAC scores because we wish that nobody has them, right? But with REAC recently being tighter and tighter on what they require, it seems like, I feel like that's a complaint that I've been receiving a lot as the coordinator. It might happen to you. So I wanted to talk about the things, like what should you do at that point? So the first thing is make sure that if you get an under 60 REAC score, look at your report. I know it might be infuriating. I know it might be mad. You might disagree. But look at your report and see if there are actual errors in it. Inspectors are humans, just like you're human, and they might have differences of opinion. So just make sure that you are looking at your report, because even though you score under 60 and it's considered failed, you still have the right to appeal your score. So keep that in mind. So for scores between 59 and 31, a notice of default of the HAP contract or PRAC contract will be issued to you, or a notice of violation of the regulatory agreement. Basically, this letter is a nasty gram to you that says, hey, you failed, and please do all this stuff. We'll talk about the requirements in just a second. You have 60 days. So if you get that notice, you have 60 days to respond to that notice. Make sure that whoever is receiving your mail, whoever is checking your mail, there's a notice of default from HUD that they're getting it to the proper people in a timely fashion. If you score 30 or lower, which is a real thing that happens, the property is automatically referred to our Department Enforcement Center, and that sounds really scary, Department Enforcement Center, and it actually is a serious thing. But what happens is we have a wonderful team at the deck called Department Enforcement Center at the deck, and they just basically are an extra help to you to get your property back in order. That's basically what they do, and if you don't comply, then it gets a little serious. But if you're a willing, compliant person or owner or management, then things go pretty smoothly. However, you will be flagged in the active partner or active partners participation system. This will kind of slow down any kind of new business you want to do with HUD, whether that is FHA financing or buying a new property, managing a new property. It kind of puts a little delay in there. So we can kind of see why that score is that way. Whose fault was it? Should we do business with this person? Again, you still have the right to appeal your score 30 to 45 days from the inspection. So once you fail once, we kind of give you the benefit of the doubt. Okay, let's correct all this stuff. We ask you to make sure, correct all the things at the property, do an owner survey. We'll talk more about that in a second. But if your second inspection the next year is also under 60, we have a problem. And your HUD account executive can seek enforcement actions. So that is including, we encourage you to sell. Maybe your owner doesn't want the property and just isn't taking care of it. Same thing if your property is just insured with FHA financing. We encourage you, maybe you should give up the property to someone else who will take care of it. We may recommend civil money penalties. No one really likes that. Suspension of the HAP contract, acceleration of the mortgage payment, or HUD taking mortgagee in possession. So it gets really serious on that second time. So that's why it's really important that you're in communication with your account executive when you have an under 60 REAC score. So when you get the notice of violation on that first under 60 REAC, what are the requirements? So we ask you to do, for HUD subsidized properties, we ask you to give a notice to all of the residents so they're all aware of what's happening. We ask you to do a survey of the entire property. So the REAC report will have deficiencies, and then we ask you, because it's only a partial, especially for the units, it's only partial, and so we want you to do an entire survey to make sure that the property is decent, safe, and sanitary, because again, if you fail that second inspection, we might have to pursue enforcement action. So we're asking you to take that extra measure to make sure that everything is corrected at the property. And then we ask you to certify that everything is good. And then submit the survey and the certification to your HUD account executive. And you can send that to your HUD account executive, sf.incoming, as you heard before this morning. Again, you have 60 days from the date of the notice to get all that done. And you might think, oh my gosh, if I'm doing a 100% survey, I might not have time. Like 60 days is not that long, right? And that's okay. So if you need an extension, that's fine. Please submit a cover letter, your survey, the current status of each deficiency that was completed, or your plan to repair it and how long you think it will take, and then the cost of the funding and deficiencies, cost of correcting the deficiencies in your sources of funding. So make sure that you're submitting that, and you can get an extension. So I know that we probably don't have anybody here, but if you have like Idaho properties, and if you have in the middle of winter, the ground is rock solid, it's snowing, it's not something that you can fix right away. So we understand that, and so that's when you would submit a repair plan to your account executive for their review. So resources to help you prepare. This is just a bunch of, if you maybe need a little extra help preparing for your REAC inspection, there are a couple links here. Also some notices about under 60 and failed REAC scores. The other thing I wanted to close with is that if you have problems with your inspectors, so they come, they're rude, they're mean, they don't do a good job in your opinion, you've had the same inspector 6 times and they always do this thing that you just don't agree with, please report that to us. Get in contact with your HUD account executive because, again, inspectors are human and not all humans are great and understand that. So if there are issues with your inspector, please, please, please contact us because just like we expect excellence from you guys, meeting all of these criteria, we also expect the same thing of anybody we do business with. So if you're having actual issues, then please report that to your account executive so that we can talk to headquarters about that. And maybe that's an inspector we don't want to do business with anymore. Okay. So that's the end of my presentation. Jamil is going to give a presentation on 2530, but before that, do you have cards? Did you have questions that need to be collected? They went over there, I'll pick that up. Anybody else? Okay, so without further ado, here's Jamil Hill.
Good morning. My name is Jamil Hill. I'm from the Los Angeles Satellite Asset Management Office, and I'm going to be giving you an overview of the 2530 previous participation and just talk about some of the best practices. Okay, so the previous participation review sets forth the HUD process which applicants seeking to participate in HUD's multifamily housing must undergo to ensure and certify that all principals of the applicant involved in a proposed HUD project have acted responsibly and have honored their legal, financial, and contractual obligations in their previous participation in HUD programs. For this participation review, the applicant must complete a certification form, which is the HUD Form 2530. And that form must be completed and signed by all principals applying to participate in multifamily housing projects. The HUD Form 2530 requires disclosure of all principals to be involved in the proposed project. Those principals will be listed in the Section 7 of the 2530 form and must also sign in the signature block. A list of projects in which those principals have previously participated or currently participate in, and a detailed accounting of the principals' involvement in the list projects. That is found on the Schedule A, which is page 2 of the 2530 form. And the applicant will list their previous projects as well as a list of their involvement with those projects. And then lastly, assurance that the principals have upheld their responsibilities while participating in their programs. The assurance are made via the certification list on the 2530. There's about 8 things that the applicants have to certify to. So there are usually two submission types. One is a property submission. So this happens when either a attempt to bringing a new management agent for a company or taking ownership of a project. So a property submission allows the entity to seek HUD's approval to play a specific role in a particular project. The other submission type is an organization change submission. And so this enables an organization who is currently in a role at a specific project to make a change in their organization's makeup. Okay, HUD came up with a new rule, and the new previous participation rule was first introduced in August of 2015, and the proposed rule was designed to provide HUD and its program participants with greater flexibility by avoiding a one-size-fits-all approach and allowing for HUD to seek information tailored to certain programs, expand electronic data practices for gathering information, and decrease the information collection imposed and generally across the board on all applicants. So they came out with a new rule, and then after that new rule, they came out with a new processing guide. This was Housing Notice 2615. It supplements the HUD previous participation review regulations in 24 CFR Part 200, Subpart H. It defines controlling participants for the previous participation review, and it was issued in October 2016. So the previous participation review is required for controlling participants. They will be who is listed as the principal on your 2530 form. In connection with each triggering event, which is a change of ownership or a change of management agent, the lenders and insured projects and entities serving in the specified capacities should provide to HUD a list of all controlling participants. Controlling participants are someone who has either financial and/or operational control. This is pretty much the essence of the new rule. HUD is interested in reviewing only those entities and individuals with operational or financial control. We no longer need to review shell entities or wholly owned entities. The housing notice provides a list of who HUD deems as controlling participants. It's about 14. Examples are entities and individuals owning directly or indirectly 25% of more of a specified capacity, managers or managing members of a limited liability, partners in a general partnership, executive directors of a nonprofit corporation. So you want to review the housing notice and take a look at the 14 people that they have listed as controlling participants. The processing guide also discusses who is excluded from the definition of controlling participants. It's one thing we want to note that these are lists of exclusions and not exemptions. So if you are under, if you find that you fall under a category under the controlling participants and you also fall under a category under the exclusions, you still are considered, it's not an exemption, you still are considered a controlling participants. Some of the exclusions are minor officers, passive participants, people with less than 25% ownership. They do not need to be included as principals. Okay, controlling participants are those entities and individuals serving as a specified capacity at a project and entitles and the entities and individual in control of that specified capacity. Each specified capacity is also a controlling participant. And so here's a list of the specified capacities for multifamily housing. You have your borrower, your owner, your management agent, and your general contractor. So along with filling out your 2530, you'll also need to submit an organization chart. The organization chart must be submitted for all organizations. They are our visual representation of the ownership structure, and things that need to be included in the organization charts are each specified capacity should have a separate chart. The org chart should show all tiers of the ownership, including the members or owners of the listed entities. At least one natural person must be identified as a controlling participant for each specified capacity. And percentages of ownership and role in the entity should be included as well. And you'll find on page 8 through 9 of the processing guide, we'll go into more detail of the organization chart, and it should be submitted whether you're filing through app system electronically or through the 2530 submitting a paper review. So the org chart is how we check to make the org chart is how we check that the identified controlling participants make sense. The organization chart should be clear enough so that someone who's unfamiliar with a transaction can quickly and easily understand the ownership and control structure. And it is the submitter's responsibility to provide HUD with the org chart and to identify the controlling participants. So following your previous participation review, participants have the ability to file an electronic 2530 directly through the Active Partners Performance System, and this is the preferred method, or you can do a 2530 paper option. But once again, we'll ask that you please send them electronically through the app system. And so I'll go in a little bit about just the submission process. Okay, so once again, the HUD encourages participants to utilize the app system when filing their previous participation certification. The app system provides for a more efficient approval process. It's secure and protect all data sent in by the industry through an ID and password process. It allows entities to also keep their personal information updated. And I had mentioned if you need to update your contact information, you can update this through the app system, updating the management agent contact as well as the owner contact system. It reduces paperwork, and each controlling participant must be registered in the business partner system registration system. So the review process and the first step is to get all of your controlling participants registered in the app system, and that's through the BPRS Business Partner Registration System. You can go online. It's best just to Google HUD.gov/apps. That'll take you to a site, and then from there you can log into app system. You can get your controlling participants registered with the BPRS, and it has a ton of resources such as the housing notices, a quick guide for apps that walks you through the very detailed the entire process of your 2530 submission. So after everyone's registered, you want to create a baseline in apps. This step establishes the organizational structure and previous participation of a controlling participants. Completing a baseline will be an organization's first steps toward creating your electronic 2530. Through this step, an organization will establish its organization structure and previous participations. Baselines do not require HUD review. They are simply a means to establish the organization structure in apps. After you create your baseline, you can go ahead and start working on your property submission. This step creates a submission for the controlling participants' role in a specific project. 2530 submissions are made to participate in a HUD project as an owner, mortgager, management agent, or any other capacity. In addition to providing the reason for submission, the applicant has to identify the specific roles for which they are applying for, and this is all done under the drop-down of the 2530 screen. After you've completed your property submission, you'll complete your certification and select to submit it to HUD. The last step will then be to upload your organization chart as well as your signatures. And so this is the app screen, and so under submission processing, you'll just select create a baseline, and they'll walk you through the process. And once again, there's a apps user guide, and it goes very detailed, walking you through the entire process. So that's one of your best resources. After you create your baseline, you'll be able to then start on your submission. If you elect to submit it via the 2530 paper, first thing is you want to make sure that you have the most dated doc in the upper its right-hand corner. It should have the date of 5/31/2019. It can be found on HUD.gov forms. So you'll make sure you have the most updated doc. In part one of the document, you want to verify the reason why the 2530 is being submitted, whether it's a new submission, a refinance, an organization change, transfer of physical assets. And then the 2530 form walks you through it. It has examples. Box 1 through 6 are very self-explanatory. Box 7 is where all of the principals are listed. And you want to note that whoever is listed, principals as well as organizations, there should be a signature correlated for them down here. So whoever's in here at box 7, somebody should be signing for them here in the signature. And you also want to include the role, the social security number, everything that's here, everything should be included. So you want to verify the 2530 is signed and dated within 6 months by all controlling participants. Verify that you've included social security numbers, tax IDs, and yes. And then here's your Schedule A. This is the back page of the 2530. And so the Schedule A must be reviewed for each controlling participant, and it goes over a 10-year period. And HUD will review the projects to see if there are any risk indicators to ensure, and also to ensure that the record is current, accurate, and update. We'll be looking for things such as defaults, foreclosures, or assignments in the past. So in here you have the principal's name, a list of previous projects, their role at that project, status of a loan, was their project ever in default, just a yes or no, and if yes, and then also your MOR rating and your physical inspection score. So if there are no flags in apps system and the applicant is able to make all of the certifications, or HUD has approved any reason as to why certification cannot be made, the previous participation review is considered complete and the submission will be approved. Things that can delay or affect an approval are flags, and so I'll go briefly just over the flags. So if there are current flags in the system, HUD staff will review the following items: the comments in the system related to the flag, the lender or participant's explanation of the flag, and any mitigation of risk associated with the flag. We'll also review if the flag has been resolved or if it can be resolved, and then the flag history in the system to assess patterns of misconduct and risk to the department. So based upon this review and including reviews of the certifications, HUD will determine whether or not the controlling participants pose any unacceptable risk to the covered project. Based on this determination, HUD may approve, disapprove, limit, or otherwise condition the continued participation of the controlling participants at that property. Disapprovals are only appropriate in the relatively few cases where risk presence cannot be mitigated. So flags are considered risk factors that require appropriate mitigation. A flag, as I stated, does not automatically exclude an applicant from participating in HUD's programs, and is not to be placed for minor infractions. The housing notice that came out, Notice 1615, also goes over the flags and discusses the different levels of the flags. There's 3 tiers. Tier 1 is your most serious, elevated to the risk department. Tier 2, compliance risk departments. And Tier 3, temporary risks to the department. So examples of Tier 3 flags would be failure to file financial statements, delinquent payments 3 or more times in a year, unacceptable physical conditions, unsatisfactory management reviews. Tier 3 flags can be resolved if the reason for the flag has been corrected, and common flags that are easily resolved are failure to find financial statements and unacceptable physical conditions. Tier 2 flags. Most Tier 2 flags are for repeated or prolonging conditions. These are just a list of examples of the Tier 2 flags. Tier 2 flags will be retained on the flag participant for 5 years. They are to be resolved within that 5 years, but even if when they're resolved, they will remain on that flag participant for 5 years. Tier 2 cannot be resolved without a supervisor level approval, so account executive will have to work with their branch chief to get it resolved. As I stated, even if it's been resolved, the flag will remain for 5 years. And Tier 2 participants with a Tier 2 flag may be approved if HUD determines that the participant has sufficiently improved their operations and oversight to ensure further violations will not occur, and the flag is not indicative of ongoing risk. Tier 1 flags are permanent. Here's the examples of some Tier 1 flags. Tier 1 flags indicate the highest level of risk and should be rare. Tier 1 flags, as I say, are permanent, and participants with any Tier 1 flag may be approved, but not by the field office. Will require headquarter approval for anybody who has a Tier 1 flag. And so this just goes over resolving the flags. As I stated, Tier 2 flags, they should be resolved prior to the 5-year time limit, but they will remain for that 5 years. And each different circumstance for each flag, the notice 2016-15 provides different circumstances for getting those resolved. And so some helpful resources for submitting your 2530 will be to, I would go into the HUD.gov's app system, and you can print out the copy of the notice. The notice explains the new 2530 submission process. It talks about flags, and also you want to print out the 2530 form so you're familiar with what we're requiring, familiar with the certifications of that form, and then also the apps industry user guide will be able to walk you through very detailed using the app system, getting registered with the app system, registering your controlling participants, and setting up your baseline and submitting your 2530s. So that includes my 2530 review, and I'll have Erin Ferguson come up and she'll give some industry announcements and closing remarks.
We have a few minutes, so we're going to go ahead and go over some of the questions we received. Does anybody have any cards or questions for Jamil's presentation? We can pick those up now. You have some? Okay, I'll gather those up. Julie and Anna, if you'd like to come up, I know you received questions.
I'll start it off. I actually got a really terrific question, so I'm excited to come up here and talk to you about this. Somebody wrote, how can HUD or a PBCA encourage an owner who is opting out to cooperate or participate in an 8BB transfer? And I'm actually expanding it a little further beyond that, but to talk a little bit about what HUD is doing, what we would hope the PBCA is doing, I will say that getting involved in the very beginning of an opt-out is important. The few opt-outs that we've had as this has been transitioning, a lot of times the topic isn't brought up until kind of late in the process. And although it's not something that's very onerous on the owner A, the transferring owner, really all they have to do is find someone that they want to transfer this to. And this subsidy is valuable, so you would think that they would love to make a deal with somebody, but the process can take up to 9 months or so. So if I'm finding out about something 2 months before the owner is opting out, then trying to convince them to extend their contract for another 6 months or more, that can be difficult. So within HUD, one of the things that we have done is that obviously when someone initially indicates that they're going to opt out or sends the 1-year notice, the first thing that the account executive is going to do is find out what's the problem and can we fix it? Because they may not even need to opt out. It may be that they have a problem with their rents. It may be that they have an issue with some other problem that can be resolved in some other way. So the very first thing that we're going to do, of course, is try to not have it be an opt-out at all. But once the account executive determines that, yes, this owner is intent on opting out, then they're going to transfer it over to me. And that's what we're seeing now, and I'm much more encouraged by the owners that I'm dealing with right now because I'm getting them relatively early in the process. So if I find out about this 10 months out, that gives us a lot of time to try to work on it. PPCA would be the same. And it's really just a matter of explaining to them that there's very little for them to do. And like I said, this is a valuable resource, and there are a lot of owners out there that would love to make a deal with them to receive this budget authority. The one thing that we can't do, and so that's why I said I'm going to extend this a little bit, because I would say that folks in the industry out there, whether you're in a nonprofit or a group like AMA, or maybe you just know other owners and they happen to talk to you about this, you can do the matchmaking that we can't. All I can do is tell an owner, there are owners out there that would love to do this. Here we have this list. And sometimes I don't want to deal with that big list. And they give me a specific criteria, then I can go in and say, okay, based on your criteria, I've sorted this down to 6 or 8. But we want to avoid any appearance of trying to favor any particular owner, so that's really a problem for us, and that can be difficult because you have owners who maybe don't want to go to the trouble of reaching out to potential project Bs, even if it could be in their own best interest in the long run. So I would encourage everybody here in those situations to maybe reach out to them and say, hey, I know an owner who's great and he's easy to work with, and they would love to have this subsidy. And that's absolutely something that you folks can in fact do. So that extends a little bit on the question, and I guess I'll just turn it over to Anna. And if anybody, my contact information is on the slide. I put a lot of material in my slide that I didn't really talk about because I wanted you to be able to have it as a resource. And if any of you have any further questions about this, please feel free to drop me a line and we'll chat about it. So thanks.
Okay, so you guys did have some burning questions, am I right? So I'm glad I passed out the note cards earlier. So we have a couple questions here about the REAC inspections. So first, are inspections required if the HUD loan is paid off? And the answer to that question is it depends. So HUD REAC inspections are required for properties that have contractual documents with HUD. So if your property is both insured and there is a subsidy contract and there's a use agreement, most likely, a HUD use agreement, most likely the answer is, of course, yes. So if you pay off your loan and there's still a HUD contract, then of course we have to still inspect the property. We have to make sure it's decent, safe, and sanitary. If you're insured only with no federal assistance, no other HUD affiliated governing documents, once you pay off that loan, you're no longer affiliated with HUD, and so a REAC inspection is no longer required. Where it gets really tricky is if you have no HUD contract, you pay off your FHA financing, and you may have a use agreement that still requires it. So those are your 3 magical keys. Is one, my light shining a little bit, yeah. Is one, do you have a HAP contract? One, is there a HUD loan or a HUD FHA financing? And then the third piece is there a use agreement that requires it? Most use agreement only properties just say that you can get an owner certified that you're in compliance. Okay. She's the one who asked the question. Our next question here is, how can we ensure the inspection scheduling is coordinated with the management agent corporate office rather than with the site at the property? It appears there's inconsistency in contact persons in HUD system. The answer is yes, there are inconsistencies. So, like Jamil just presented, a good way for you to ensure that is to make sure that that your entities have the correct tax information, and also if that is correct and you're still having issues, please contact your HUD account executive and say, for example, Dear SUPNA, the wrong person is being contacted for REAC scheduling. Can you please ensure that this person is contacted? SUPNA will then provide that information to me, and I'll forward that on to headquarters so they can have that in their database. Okay. Next one. So this property scored 83 in 2016. Congratulations. We have not been notified for an inspection despite it's been over a year or over 2 years. How come? And when should we expect it? So for REAC inspections, we try really hard to catch everything. We have so many properties, and sometimes things fall through. And so if you are anxious about that and you want to get your inspection in, please contact, again, your account executive to get that inspection scheduled so that you can be prepared for that, okay? Hope that answers that question. I don't know the how come. I don't know that. One thing that could happen is maybe your property is in a more remote area. So for example, I don't know if she's here, but our Ms. Robin Thompson has a lot of properties in Alaska, and they can only come once a year, and they can't always go. I had a friend, sidebar, I had a friend who lived in Alaska, and she said that she actually had to take sled dogs from town to town. So if your property's like that, they might not happen on schedule, so just consider that. It's not our fault, okay? So these are pretty good questions here too, and you might have these questions as well. Is the designing phase, underlined, designing phase, would be considered a major rehab already in progress is underlined here, and can be considered as a good, valid reason for postponement? The answer is no. So there has to be active construction. You have signed the notice to proceed. Someone has torn down a wall, or if you've started some kind of construction on the property, the designing phase doesn't count. And let me explain that a little bit. Especially for our HUD assisted properties, your contract says that you are going to lease decent, safe, and sanitary housing, right? So that means month to month, it should be in a decent, safe, and sanitary condition month to month as you voucher. That's the ideal world. And so that's why there's this pushback on REAC inspections, and why when you're in the design process, it doesn't count, because it should be at least passable, right? You might not get that high 90, but you should be able to at least pass that. On the flip side of that, if you're like, well, okay, we're gonna fail, that's okay, because what happens is a notice of default goes out, right? And it asks you, what's your plan? And you say, well, I'm gonna rehab the property, there's your plan. Okay, so that kind of a little bit of that. The next question is, where can I find information for what you just presented? I believe Amanda will send out slides. So you'll have that information for other sorts of REAC information. Again, if you Google, the links are on the back of your handout as well, but I don't think you're going to manually type that. So if you Google HUD technical or appeal REAC, the link will come up for you for that. The rest of it you'll have to get through the PowerPoint. Again, it's something that's why I wanted to present, is that it's not available anywhere else. So if you do have further questions and it's not on the website, please contact your account executive and they'll be able to help you, or at least get you to somebody who can help you. Okay? Jamila or Segna?
Just to answer one question, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So a question I got was, what is the turnaround time for approval of a submission of organizational change through apps? One of the great things about apps is if there's a small organizational change that does not require approval, apps will automatically identify that, and as an account executive, we'll get a notice of it, and if there's no action that's required from our part, then nothing needs to be done. If there is a bigger organizational change, typically we have 30 days to process the 2530. And using the app system allows us to review all the flags through apps, allows us to send it up to our supervisor, our branch chief, for signature. So we're usually able to meet those time frames. The second one is, what is the time frame for removal of app flags? So there really isn't a time frame. If you do have the app flag, this one example is a failure to file an audit financial statement. If you've confirmed that it has been submitted, you'll want to reach out to the assigned account executive. They'll be able to check and make sure it's in the system. Even though you may have submitted, REAC does have to review their annual financial statements. For some reason, it may end up getting kicked back to you. So you may have submitted, but it's not in our system because there was an issue with it. So once you've submitted that, you want to check with your account executive. They can confirm that it's in the system. Then they can go to apps and resolve that flag. Last question I got was, Tier 1 flags, does HQ get in touch with the owner agent for resolution? So Tier 1 flags are your most serious things, such as conviction of fraud or embezzlement of funds. And so typically, in order to resolve a Tier 1 flag, you're going to be working with your account executive or probably a resolution specialist, since it is a high-level issue. And they will probably be working with headquarters, but your main contact will be with your resolution team to work over whatever it calls you Tier 1 flag. And in regards to a 2530, if a property does have a Tier 1 flag, it's a permanent flag, so it won't be removed. And in order for us to get approval for that, your account executive will have to draft a memo, send that up to headquarters asking for approval. So Tier 1 flags, you're going to be working mostly with your account executive just to resolve whatever the issue is. But in regards to the 2530, we will require headquarters approval.
Thank you. We had some more questions just due to time and the answers that need to be provided. If you send in a card, you will get an email from us for those questions. And so now, do industry announcements? Anybody like to share anything?
I'm Barry Kammer with Alma NCH. Most of you should have received a save the date card for our upcoming conference and trade show. This is already 7th consecutive trade show and conference. It is going to be our biggest yet. We will probably finally go over that 1,000 attendee mark. We're going to have more vendors for the trade show than ever before. We have compliance tracks, we have service coordinator tracks, we have management tracks, we have maintenance tracks, all for learning for all of your site staff and your management staff. So I encourage you to come, register by August 10th for an early bird prize. And if you didn't get one of these cards, just tap me on the shoulder and I'll give you one. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other industry announcements? No? Okay. A couple of little things before we move on. So we referenced a lot of resources on the back of your agenda. You'll see those. But via the listserv, Amanda will be sending out the PowerPoint, so you'll get those links as well. And also, when she sends out the listserv, you'll get the link to the YouTube video when it's ready, okay? We did provide an evaluation. It's on the back table. We would appreciate your feedback and any comments that you have. So if you can just grab one and take a moment to fill those out for us before you head out. And at this time, I believe we are ready for Kahi to come up and do a training for us on waitlist and special claims. Amanda, do I need to advance this at all?